So to give you some examples of what you can do with your additional points that you have with your stylus, here's some just examples that you've done a lot of the landscape work with the large iron. You've put in the background, the sky, some of the water, and then you've come back in with the micro tip to do some of the parts below the tree line there, and also the little plants that are coming up from the rocks, swirling up to make the tree limbs. And then you take the pen point again and start working and putting in leaves on the trees and any of the finer detail. Once again, we're taking a look at using the micro tip to create tree trunks and limbs, and then coming back with the pen point and, for instance, doing the pine needles on the pine tree. That's done with the pen point. Sometimes I will use, I'll come in first with a little clear medium and then come back with some color to just, it kind of blends it a little better that way. I've also come down in the foreground and used that pen point to put in some of the red on the flowers. Here again we have flowers that were created with the micro point, and then use the same micro point to come down and do the leaves on the bottom of the flowers and the stems. The rest of that detail down below, of course, was done with lifting the iron up, creating those little grass patterns. Another similar example using the same tools to create a similar type of floral and landscape pattern. Of course, this particular one was done with the painting with Kleenex technique. And so the background sky and the foreground was put in, and then I used the Kleenex pad to paint the mountain in. But a lot of times when I do this, I will use the pen point dipped in a little white to go in and add some of the little small snow details on top of the mountain, like at the very crest of the hill. Here's an example where I took the micro point to do some of the flowers, but I created an interesting little pattern here by taking those oblong sections that were done by just the edge of the iron sliding to one side. And then if you notice that this was all done on a sort of a dark background, so I first put several layers of different colors that were sort of dark in the background, so that when I did do that sideways swipe with the iron, it did create a lighter area, which sort of added to the design. Just another point about, again, using the micro tip, doing the going up and making leaves, making stems, making flowers, but again using that background dark areas and sections to kind of enhance the pattern. It creates a whole different look when you have that sort of blocked in solid background. Using the same tools again to use leaves, you'll notice that I incorporated that with some hot air work for the flowers. And then of course the lower part, those larger leaves, were really done by just putting some green color on the very edge of the iron and tapping it very lightly in both directions to make those larger leaf patterns. Here again I have started with using some of the same micro tips, but added in a little process of very lightly hitting it with some hot air to just slightly distort the floral elements so that it creates a rather nice flow with the iron pattern in the background. Here again we have the background laid down. We've used the micro tip to go up and make those lines in the back, a little bit of the floral pattern, but there's another element here where I had some wax down just above those green leaves toward the bottom of the picture. You notice those sort of whited areas where it looks like some wax was lifted. That's because I had wax down, I laid some Kleenex on top of it, then I put the micro tip on top of the Kleenex where the hot Kleenex then sucked up some of the wax, leaving that white pattern behind, which is an interesting way to work with some of your designs. Using that same idea, here we have put in the two floral patterns on both sides, but that branch coming down also was treated in the same way by First putting the branch down with the wax, then laying a little Kleenex down, heating the top side and lifting off some to give that bark look to the branch. This is a pattern that sort of discovered by ordering a different stylus from where I normally get my styluses. And what was interesting about this particular one, it had a point that had a, well, the point looked just like a metal ball. It wasn't a disc, it was a ball. So when I used the micro tip and made the floral pattern of the flower on those stems, I came back and used that ball tip to go down the middle and create that center part of the flower. And then also, if you look below, you'll see a lot of those rounded areas which were created with that same tip. Once again, I've used that same rounded tip on this one, but I added another little element in that it's a little maybe difficult to see, but there's sort of a background pattern behind those flowers. And that is where I used a piece of embossed felt that I had soaked in some wax, and then I heated that and on a hot plate, and then put that hot felt down on top of the wax till it lifted up that pattern. Then I did the flowers on top. And just to finish up on these small cards, here's that same concept with the flowers, but in the background using a combination of that pattern created by the felt embossed sheet and then that rounded ball tip. So just a combination to lay down first before I came in and started doing the flowers and the stems on top of that. And a nice little spring look by doing a little wipe out in the middle with creating the lake by warming the pad underneath where you have the card, warming up the wax, taking a little Kleenex, wiping out the lake, coming back in around it, creating the outline of the lake, using the pen point to create a lot of the grasses, and the micro point to do some of the other vegetation, and the tree trunk, coming back in with the pen point to create the cherry blossom look in the trees. Here's another quick look of using the hot air to create those fantasy flowers, and then the micro point to create the outside of the flower and the leaf patterns, as well as the iron to create larger leaf patterns underneath. After putting a background down of wax with the iron, then coming in with the side of the iron and sliding it to one side, creating the tree trunks, and then the vertical lines going up, done with the micro point, coming back in with the pen point and creating the flowers to have sort of an interesting composition. Similar idea of using that darker background with the iron, and then coming in and creating some of the tapping patterns underneath to create the leaf backgrounds. Then coming in with that micro point to do the leaves and the flowers. This is one where I actually dribbled some ink onto the cardstock first, and then I blew it with the air gun, just regular cold air, until the ink created a pattern that I thought looked like a tree. So then I continued on with that theme and put in the background with the wax, and then came back in and used wax on the foreground over the tree to enhance the tree look. Another example of taking some ink, in this case sort of a vibrant pink ink, and splattering it on the back of the card, moving it a little bit with air, and then coming back in and using that as a beginning point for design, and then putting wax on top to create this final effect. This is an example of where I took a large piece of paper, which we're now talking 17 by 24 in size, and I put that on top of a hot pancake griddle, and I started waxing the background and using hot air and moving some of the wax around by hand until I created a background. Then I took it off and did the tree structures, and after that I laid some carbon paper down with some designs that I found of different crows, and I traced the outline of those crows onto the wax. Then I took the stylus and began to color all of those in with the wax pen. And see, even some of the smaller birds on the top and the bottom were done the same way.